Wow. When I got this bulletin some weeks ago or some months ago, there's a lot of memories that started flooding back. And, I've been spending some time thinking about those memories, about when this all started. It was actually it was very delightful for me to hear Erica talk about the work that CRWRF has done through those years. Indeed, it's come a long way since we've collected quarters at the door, or as we called it at the time, with door collection. And we as kids, we had visions of collecting doors or something, but it was a door collection or a collection at the door. At any rate, I just want to take a few minutes to reflect some of those early days when this all started. Now, you mentioned already that my father was instrumental in starting this. In fact, it was the words around Matthew 25 that were particularly impactful for him in terms of starting this. You remember Jesus talks about the goats and the sheep in Matthew 25, and the king comes down, comes down to his throne, and he suggests to people, look, I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was sick and you didn't come and visit me. And then, of course, you get this back and forth. When did we see you? And he said, look, unless you've done it to the least of these, you haven't done it to me. And that was the motivation that, in large measure, was behind my father's thinking about we need to do something. How can we be the hands and feet of Jesus? We've been here for 10 years as an immigrant people coming from Holland, but what about the next level? How do we do that? And to be the arms and feet of Jesus. So that's what started. And as Erica said, they gathered a group of people together, got permission from the church consistory to collect at the door 25 cents. And, they got together a bevy of people to hold the bag at the door and maybe poke people if the money wasn't coming in fast enough. But I was among those called upon to collect at the door. And I must say, the image of collecting a loaf of bread didn't pass us by. We understood the significance of that, but I must confess also that we probably wondered, what good is a quarter going to do? Like, how far is a quarter going to do? Now, we look at that, of course, as in our 21st century, a quarter isn't very far, it isn't very much, but in those days, you could buy a loaf of bread for a quarter rather than what we do today. So we dutifully collected that money, but the question came up, what are you going to do with this money? And this was, of course, before the connection with the Love Home was determined. And I want to just talk a little bit about a Korean pastor who was the pastor of a Presbyterian church in a city called Daegu. And he was traveling back and forth between Holland and Korea. And the reason for his traveling, because he was doing a doctorate degree in Kumpen. He would come on his way to Holland. He would often come to our place and stay with our folks. And when he was in Holland, though, there were two nurses there that were prompting him to give them information about the situation with orphanages in Korea. They wanted to do something. And it was interesting that you read James 1, because it was those words about orphans and widows and so on that prompted these nurses to talk to this minister and say, hey, can we do something? And he said, well, yeah, there's an orphanage in Korea that people from my church community are working on, and perhaps we can put those two together. Well, that happened, and of course, with the trips to Canada or through Canada, visiting with the CRWRF folks, they decided that, you know what, not only could the folks from Holland help here, but also CRWF could park their money in the Love Home in Korea. And that's really where the connection was made. Interestingly, that this pastor was Dr. Herr, who got a doctorate degree in Holland. You know, you got to understand that this guy spoke Korean, a little bit, a smattering of English, and the rest was in Holland. So it was through English that he learned some Dutch so he could get a doctorate degree and return to Korea. Of course, as some of us know, he actually went to Australia, and he was a pastor in Perth for a number of years, and then after that returned to Korea. He mentioned to these nurses that there were, this love home had started, and that there was a lady there, Miss Park, who had started the love home, but Miss Park had conscripted 2 other people as well. And it was a single mom, Kim, her last name was Kim, and her daughter, who came to help at the orphanage. And so that's how the orphanage started. Let me just take a minute or so to talk about Mrs. Kim, the single mom, and her daughter. They had what shall I say? How do I describe this life? It really started in China, in Harbin, China, because at that time, Korea was occupied by the Japanese. And so many people from Korea had traveled to China. If they had connections in China, they traveled to China to get away from the Japanese who had invaded their homeland. And so this family as well had gone there. But then after the end of the war, Japan, of course, went back to Japan, and South Korea was liberated. But shortly thereafter, of course, the Korean War started. And it was during that time that the single mom and her daughter, after they had returned to Korea, they discovered that their father and husband had joined the North Korean army and was involved with the militia. And so there was a separation of the family, and the mom and the daughter moved to Taegu, started life again, and of course, then eventually connected with the love home. Now, you know, that's a long time ago, 60 years. Most of those people have passed on. My folks are gone. Miss Park is gone. Mrs. Kim is gone. However, her daughter's here. Her daughter's here. And I'm just so delighted to, excuse me, to introduce Irene Kim. So Ayun was the daughter in question, working in the love home. Now, when they came from Harbin in China, they weren't Christian, but they moved to Taegu, and through circumstances and whatever else, they became Christian. And you know, it was sometime later, after working in the love home, that Ayun came to Canada. She was sponsored, came to Canada. That was, actually, she came to Canada the day before Diane and I got married in '74. And we've maintained some contact. When I saw this picture, I thought to myself, well, there's all these people on the top of the page here, and I'm sure that Ayun is part of that. So I connected with Ayun, and sure enough, she's right in there with glasses on. If you've got that one, she's in the middle, top row, and her mom's in there as well. But a lot of the rest of the people have passed on. But we're just so delighted that she can be here, and that we've had the connection with someone from the original love home. And you know, it's just been a wonderful connection. We want to walk through a few slides, and we're going to do that through discussion here. So if you could, Tony could, that helps. Sorry, could you hear me? Do I have to start over? Okay. So in the middle of the slide there is Reverend Herr, and that's when he was a younger person, obviously. And to the right is Miss Park.
Yes, that is Miss Park on the right, and on the left is Miss Park's sister, and in the middle is a church evangelist.
So I chatted with, let me just get this thing rolling too. I chatted with Megan. How do you start an orphanage? Well, you know, she showed me this picture, and why don't you talk about it?
Actually, that picture is the babies' orphanage, they call, under 5 years old, only they stay there. Any parent cannot look after the babies. Sometimes they just deliver there, leave front of the gate, and sometimes they have boxes to put baby in. And then who looks after that orphanage? Every morning they come out and in the front of the orphanage, then check it out. Always see a few babies are out there. And then they look after, they keep them there, look after.
However, there were more than those babies, or those babies, of course, grew up as well. But this is a picture of the Love Home. Just tell us a little bit about all those kids. They weren't, they're probably different, but.
Yeah. So, as he explained in the beginning, how we studied from two nurses from Netherlands, Kampen, two ladies. They had every month $10 they saved, and then they asking each other, hey, how do we help with this money to poor kids? And then they knew the Reverend who was studying in Kampen, and they contacted with him. Okay, we have this much collected, so do you know any orphanage in Korea? So Reverend says, okay, sure, I know. There are a lot of people need it. So that's how we also found out, Reverend Hurl actually found out in Burlington, CLWIF in Ontario, and these nurses, they asked to Burlington how to send this money. So actually, they sent the money to Burlington CLWIF, and then Burlington sent to Korea. And before that start, actually, Reverend Hur came to Miss Park, one of the director. Oh, we have this money from Holland, and I don't know anybody who can look after the kids. Do you know anybody? And he said, sure, I do. I will go and find out and ask her to look after. And yeah, one time, Reverend Her came back to Korea and asked her, would you like to look after the children? And the Reverend Her told her all the story. And she says, sure, I know who can do it, but I would love to, but actually, she never got married, so she never had the children. She doesn't know how to look after the children. And she came to my mother and asked to my mom, Miss Kim, you've been praying for look after the poor children. I think this is your answer from the God. So, would you like to do that? And my mom was so happy she can help poor children. She says, okay, that's God's answer. I've been praying for it. Okay, that's God's answer. So they decided to set the orphanage. But the first of all, we didn't have any place to get the children. And yeah.
So this is, I will talk a little bit about these are some of the kids in one of the staff there.
Well,
but,
yeah.
The building in the back, particularly, you want to speak to that?
That house is, those children are altogether 20 kids. So, the baby orphanage people, we saw that. There where we got the 20 children to start it. And all the children, where we brought it, nobody was normal. Everyone was some kind of a sickness, a trouble. Some people cannot talk. And that kind of children we received. And we studied in that kind of poor house. And then after a few months, what happened? The government officer visited. They said, what's going on here with the little children? And we explained, we got some support from Netherlands, and then we got these little kids we are going to look after. And they said, who gave you authorized to do that? Well, we didn't know. We have to get the authorized, or we didn't know any law to look after the children. And they said, no, you cannot do that. Everybody has to go. Everybody has to go close that door. You cannot have it. And then next day they came back, they said, okay, we can help you do it, but you have to have more children, not 20 children, minimum 60 children. But also you have to have bigger house for 60 children. And we thought, oh my, we don't have any money here. What can we do? I mean, we had to just, my mom and me only had a little bit. We put everything there, but we don't have enough to build a new house. And then we prayed. Miss Paul, my mom and me, we really prayed hard. Please, God, we don't know what to do, how to get the money. Please help us. We cannot throw these children away. Please help us. And then I wrote a letter to Canadian CLWLF. God, our prayer answered. So CLWLF, they send a lot of money, which they have been collected every Sunday. Then money they send to us, and then new building. Yeah.
Yeah, just
Yeah, that is still all the
just a little bit
house.
further, Tony.
Yeah.
No, more. There. That
Yeah, that building that we built very nicely to 2 floors with the CLWLF support, and government came. They investigated everywhere if everything is okay for the children to live. So not only the building outside, of course it looks nice, but inside the electricity or bathing place, everywhere, kitchen, wherever, everything has to be perfect. So that was finally passed. And then we had to collect some more kids for 60 children. So all fit in that each room 5 children put in each room. So upstairs, the one big room is every morning. That's our worship room. Every morning before the day starts, and the children, before they go to school, always we have little worship together, and then prayer, and then they start the day. And all the rooms, there were enough for 60 children.
You want to flip back to 2 slides? Yeah, so these are kids heading off to school.
Yeah.
But maybe you want to speak to what they're wearing and how that happened.
Well, those, actually, all the different dresses. One of our church lady, she has a private store and very, very rich person. She donated for children. That's the first day to go to school. Those are the 20 children, the first children.
Okay, just flip ahead. I'm a little conscious of the time here because Winston's going to run out of time and everybody's going to have to go home. We'll just end with this. I was looking for a slide to kind of go off into the future, and this kid is on a bike and he's off into the future. But Ayun, even though she lived in Canada, she did go back and forth to Korea from time to time, and she maintained some contact with those kids. I wonder if you could just tell a little bit about some of these kids that you have connected with when you returned to Korea. They phone you from time to time.
Actually, I was so happy to see them because all the children, they still were going to church every Sunday, and they kept all their faith. None of them run out. Everybody go to church. I was so happy to see. And then last time I went back, and I saw most of them all married, and they have their own family, and some children have their own business, and they were doing really well. And also, still, they going to church. They still keeping faith. That's the main thing to me. I really was happy. Yeah.
Ayun, thank you very much.
Well, good evening, friends. The speech that I've prepared for you tonight is called Bread, Not Stones, Fish, Not Snakes. Bread, not stones, fish, not snakes. This is a reference from the teaching of Jesus in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus asks us a rhetorical question. He says, who among you would give your child, would give your son, if he asks for bread, would give him a stone? And who among you here, if your son were to ask for a fish, would you give him a snake? And it's a rhetorical question, and the answer, of course, is none of us would do that. None of us would do that. And then Jesus goes on to teach, and he says, well, if you who are evil know how to give good gifts, then how much more does not your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who love him, or to whom he loves? And so the teaching of Jesus in that section in Matthew 7 is to teach us that we ought to expect good gifts from God. Now, the teaching that he gives is based on 2 assumptions. The first assumption is when we are asked, we give. That's his assumption. When we're asked, we give. And then his second assumption is that when we give, we know how to give good gifts. Who of you, if your son asks him for bread, would give him a stone? The assumption is when you're asked, you give. And when you give good gifts. Now, what I'm not going to do tonight is preach a sermon on this text. What I would like to do is I'd like to extract from that teaching Jesus' two assumptions. The assumption that when we are asked, we give, and that when we give, we know how to give good gifts. And I'd like us just to meditate on that a little bit. Is that true for us? When we are asked, do we give? And when we give, do we know how to give good gifts? I'd like to think about those two assumptions together with you. Do we know how to give bread and not stones? Do we know how to give fish and not snakes? So the first assumption, is it true that when we are asked, we give? And I think that you could start off by answering that question by saying yes. When we are asked, we give. Many of us could say, by God's grace indeed, when the call comes out for me to help others, I respond by the power of the Holy Spirit, and I say yes. When we are asked, we give. I have a friend named Siva Kumar, and he's a new Canadian. He's from India, and I met him in Ottawa, and he started coming to our church, and he told me, he says, oh man, in India you learn how to make money. But what I'm learning at your church is how to give that money away. He said, I'm so surprised that this community, this church, how much money people give away and how many causes that you collect for and support and how many things that you are willing to share, how many people you're willing to share with. He's like, the Lord's teaching me generosity in this church. Isn't that a beautiful testimony? There's so many of us, so many people in our churches that when asked, they give. And I imagine that many of you do the same thing. Certainly as a board member at CRWRF, I'm wowed by when the call goes out, how many people give. We have a budget of somewhere $1.5 million. $1.5 million. Churches, individuals, corporations giving of their hard-earned money while supporting a bunch of other causes and so many other things. People, when they're asked, they give. So the answer to the first question, when we are asked, do we give, I think is true. We do. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. By His grace, when we're asked, we give. So you could answer, yes, that's the case. But then if I look at myself in my own life, like, yeah, there's plenty of times when people ask of me and I give. But I know that I also tend to be kind of tight-fisted with my stuff, and that sometimes I don't give when I'm asked. I heard someone say that, all babies are born with fists like this. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to learn to open them up in generosity toward others. And I know in my own life that so often I'm living my life like this. I can remember when I was a little kid, my mom would give me collection money to put in the collection bag. And then I learned if you hold the coin with your two fingers and then you hit the bag with your knee when it goes by and pretend to put the money in, you can put the money in your pocket. You can keep it for yourself. And it's a funny story. Right? Has anybody else ever done that? Maybe just me. So it's a funny story when you're young, but if I'm honest as an adult, I still sometimes I'm like this. Jesus is spending, my whole life, Jesus has been teaching me again and again and again, Winston, you were born like this. Open up your hands when asked. Give of yourself. Give to others who are in need. So yes, we do give when we're asked, but then at the same time, maybe the answer is no, we don't always do that. And on the 60th anniversary of the Canadian Foreign World Relief Fund, I would like to rededicate myself to the text that was at the inspiration of this organization, 1 Peter 4, verse 10, each of you should use whatever gift you have received from God to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. The Lord gives us so many good gifts so that we might give them away in service to others, not to be tight-fisted, but to be open-handed and generous. How do you do that? How do we continue the good giving and not be tight-fisted? You could answer that question in a bunch of different ways, but I've been thinking about the name of the organization is the Canadian Reformed World Relief Fund. And I sincerely believe that perhaps what we need to do is we need to reach back into our ecclesiastical heritage as Canadian Reformed people and recapture some of that rich theological ecclesiastical heritage we have. The Canadian Reformed churches find their roots in the Dutch Reformed churches in the Netherlands. So I grew up in a Dutch family, and so in my Dutch family, we heard this joke. Why do Dutch men have big ears and bald heads? Why do Dutch men have big ears and bald heads? Because they go, what was the price? Whoo! Right? And it's a joke that Dutch people are cheap. Right? So I'm of Dutch heritage. That's the joke that we tell about ourselves. Dutch people are cheap. That's the stereotype. But actually, I think it's not quite true. I think historically, Dutch people have been frugal. And there is a difference between being cheap and frugal. You can be frugal out of fear because you want to keep things for yourself, or you can be frugal so that you might be generous with others. You might live simply so that others can simply live through your generosity. That is part of our heritage. Part of our heritage that we also need to recapture. It's a heritage that goes back to the early church, to people like Basil of Caesarea, sometimes called Basil the Great, a pastor, a great defender of the Nicene Creed in the 300s after Christ, who taught his church that when your standard of living increases, when your income increases, don't increase your standard of living. Increase your generosity. When your income increases, don't build bigger barns. Give away more money. John Calvin took that teaching and wrote about it in the Institutes, where he says, Christians, he said, I don't want to make a strong rule, but Christians in general should rid themselves of superfluous wealth. They ought not to collect wealth. They ought to give it to the poor. That's part of our ecclesiastical, our theological heritage. And it's ingrained also in Canadian Reformed traditions and in Canadian Reformed way of thinking about things. We have in the back of the Book of Praise in the Canadian Reformed churches these beautiful old forms that you read at different occasions. The form for Lord's Supper says that if you are guilty of the sin of extravagance, the hoarding of money and not giving to the poor, you should not take the Lord's Supper. We should recapture that part of our heritage. The form for the solemnization of marriage in the back of the Book of Praise lays out a charge to the husband and the wife. And it says to the husband, you ought to work hard to make money, to care for your family and for the poor. And then it says to the wife, understanding her to be the keeper of the home, it says the woman should live modestly so that she also can help the poor. The idea there is that a marriage is not just for you, that you work hard, live frugally, so you can care for your family and care for the needy. That's part of what it means to be Canadian Reformed as well. And so perhaps we need to recapture some of those very beautiful things. John Leith, in his introduction to the Reformed tradition, says this: simplicity has been a hallmark of the Reformed lifestyle. The ethical problems of contemporary life, created by hunger and poverty, call for restraint of personal desires and moderation in expectations for the self. Learning to live simply is an imperative of the culture as well as the Reformed tradition. Yet it is not an easy achievement. It's not easy to live simply so that others might simply live, because we're all born like this. May the Lord Jesus teach us to open our hands to the poor. We're going to celebrate Christmas soon. Jesus was born as a baby. Jesus was born like this. And then as he grew up and grew in stature and character, opened his hands to those in need and then open them to Roman nails on the cross, so that you and I, by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, might learn ourselves to open our hands in generosity to those in need. It's not easy, but it's possible. It's possible, and it's beautiful to recommit ourselves also to this truth, so that in 60 years' time, when we celebrate 120 years of the Canadian Reform World Relief Fund, 60 years where I and many of you will be dead, may there be a whole nother generation to fill this room that have said, we learned from our older generation to open our hands to those in need, that when we were asked, we gave. That's reflections on that first assumption. The second assumption is then, okay, so then if we do give, do we know how to give good gifts? And all of you know what it's like to either receive or give a gift with good intentions, but it wasn't very helpful. You try to do something nice for your spouse, perhaps, and it backfires. You try to do nice something for a kid or for somebody else, and it turns out to not go well. You try to give bread, and you give a stone by accident. You try to give a fish, but you end up giving a snake. It's not like you do it on purpose, of course, but you try to do the right thing, but giving gifts, good gifts, is difficult. I remember when my oldest son was a little baby, we were living in Mali, West Africa. It was really hot there, and he would often wake up as a baby, and he was thirsty, so we would make him a bottle. So one night I hear my son crying. It's my turn to make the bottle. I get out of bed, move the mosquito net, put it back in, go to the kitchen. I'm in a daze, make the bottle, stir in the milk powder, bring it to him, give it to him. He starts drinking it. He goes back to sleep. I go back to sleep. The next morning, I go get him out of bed, and he's got all this white gook caked all over his chest and his head and face and in his hair, and his bottle is all congealed and all gross. I'm like, what in the world? And I go to the kitchen and I look and I realize that I didn't make him a milk powder bottle, I made him flour water. I tried to give him a good gift, but it didn't work. I tried to give him bread, but gave him a stone, or he pooped stones for the next day. And that happens in everyday life. You try to do the right thing, but giving good gifts is difficult. It's a hard thing to do. We make mistakes. You want to give fish, you end up giving snakes. And so a couple of stories of times that this has happened in everyday life, especially in trying to give good gifts cross-culturally and doing so also as CRWRF. Years and years ago, 25 years ago, I went on a FaithWorks trip to Haiti. And we were working at an orphanage, and then we had a day off. And so, we're on a CRWF-supported trip, and they said, on our day off, there's another mission in town that CRWF is not affiliated with, but they feed people up in the mountains, and you can go see the mountains with them. So we all hop in the pickup truck and on the back, and they got all kinds of food loaded up, and we go way up in the mountains in Haiti. And then we arrive in a valley, and in that valley, they had rows of people lined up, big rows of people lined up in the hot sun waiting for the food distribution. And then they had a couple of local kids from the city. They came and they gave their testimony on a loudspeaker, and then somebody played some music, and they told us, encourage people to sing. So they were walking up and down the aisles, like, you sing, you have to sing. And then our job was to hold these bags of food that had all the individually wrapped bags of rice, and then we had to drag them along, and they said, go as fast as you can and throw the food at people as fast as you can, so get it done. And we raced up these rows, and we threw food at people after we had made them sing for it. And then they said, when you're done, get back to the truck as quick as possible. We ran back to the truck and hopped in the truck, and as we left, the people picked up stones and threw it at us. Good intentions on whoever organized that disaster, to want to help people, want to give food, but it did it in such a way, humiliating people, making them listen to some young person's testimony and sing for their food in the hot sun and have food thrown at them, that the people threw stones back in return. It's hard to give good gifts. You want to give bread, and you give stones, which they throw at you. It's difficult. When I was working in Mali, we had a project that was trying to fight female excision, female genital mutilation, the practice of removing all of the exterior parts of the female genitalia. which is a common practice in West Africa. We're working with, beginning this project, we working with a particular village, working with Christians in that village. They decided, we're going to stop this practice. We're not going to involve ourselves in female genital mutilation. And then one day we got the news, after a year or two, they said, the village next door told us, they found out that we don't excise our women. We don't circumcise our women. And they told us that that was so shameful that they would never marry anybody from our village. And we were so ashamed that we excised all the women of the village yesterday. We're trying to help, trying to do good, but we ended up doing it in a way that brought shame to people. And so they reversed it all. You try to give bread, and instead you end up giving a stone. You try to give fish, and you give a serpent. Giving good gifts is difficult. It's hard to do. Another example, in the video you saw some people in Niger digging a hole in the ground. It's to make homemade fertilizer. And then when you plant your crops and as they begin to sprout, then you dig around each stalk and you add your homemade fertilizer in there, and allows your crops to sustain drought and difficult conditions. Works great. It's very labor intensive. So we're working on a project like that, CRWF supported project, and then we discover that a bunch of people in the village are like, nah, we're not going to do that. Because we know that if a famine comes, USAID or some other organization will just bring us relief food. Good intentions to go deliver food to people, but doing it in such a way that ends up causing them not wanting to do work to be able to keep their agriculture sustainable on their own. You try to do something good and you give bread, but it turns into a stone. Or in the case of in 2005, I believe it was, in Mali, we had a locust plague that came down from the Islamic Republic of Mauritania into Mali. People were about to harvest. All the food is in the field. They're all happy. The food that's going to feed them for a year. The locusts come in like a biblical proportions, eat all of the crops in like 2 days. Swarms of locusts eat everybody's food in the whole area. So we have a contact, a Christian Reformed missionary who's been working in the area for 20 years. He tells us what's happening. We go up to talk to him about it. And he says, maybe we can do a food distribution of some sort. And we find out that food distribution in this area, he says, there's never been a good one. Everybody hates food distributions here because they're done so poorly. And they cause all kinds of conflict in the area. Again, people trying to give food, trying to give bread, but it turns into a stone. Causes crisis, causes difficulty in people's everyday lives. Good intentions are not enough. You can have good intentions and want to give bread, but you give a stone. You want to give fish, you give a snake. And then the great danger in all of that is that you do that as Christians, and so you come in the name of Jesus and you're going to give a good gift, but then you end up throwing a stone at somebody or releasing a serpent in their midst. And then you disgrace the name of Jesus. Perhaps some of you have read the book, The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. And in that story, it's the story of a missionary named Nathan Price, and he's not a great missionary. And he's in the Congo, and he's doing all these terrible things, thinking in his own way. And he wants to do what's right, but he just keeps on harming people. And he can't pronounce the word precious in the local language. So every time he says Jesus is precious, he accidentally says Jesus is poisonwood. The Bible is precious, and he accidentally says the Bible is poisonwood. He's given this really mixed, terrible message. He's trying to give bread, but he's given stones. He's trying to give fish, but he's giving snakes. And that's what happens too when we don't give gifts well. We want to show love and help to people, and we can actually instead harm people. So what do you do then? How do you give bread, not stones? How do you give fish, not snakes? I would like to give you 3 things that I've learned along the way, and most of them come from my former team leader in West Africa, Mary Crickmore, who also introduced to me this metaphor, this idea of bread, not stones, fish, not snakes. The first one is this: how do you give bread, not stones? You be a humble learner. You have to be a humble learner. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, in deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom, says James. The world is always more complicated than you think. People's lives are always more complicated than you think. You have to be humble. You don't know everything. You have to try your best to learn things you do not know. Be a humble learner. I experienced this recently. I work in downtown Hamilton, Ontario, and I was at a street mission, and I met a guy. His name is George. He's got long, straggly hair, and he says to me over coffee, he says, "Feminism killed Hamilton." I'm like, cool, tell me what happened. Feminists, he said, the feminists closed all the strip clubs in Hamilton. I was like, well, I don't have a problem with that. I think strip clubs should be closed. Strip clubs are, promote all kinds of sinful activities, trafficking of women, sin against the seventh commandment, all kinds of things. I think strip clubs, it's good that we close them. He's like, I don't care about that. He says, every strip club had a little hotel of a couple rooms. It was the cheapest place you could stay for 1 or 2 nights. And when I'm between houses or apartments, the one place that I could find a place to stay was at the strip club. But now when I'm between apartments, I have to sleep in the park. Strip clubs played a role in the economy of the homeless people of Hamilton. I had no idea. You have to be a humble learner. The world's always more complicated than you think. You have to humble yourself and say, I have so much to learn. Poverty, you have so much to learn about poverty. It's not just economic. It's also spiritual and communal and social. And poverty can be related to being a victim, and it can be related to your own responsibilities. It's complicated. You have to be a humble learner when you're trying to give good gifts. We try to do this as a board as well. We try to read books like When Helping Hurts and other things. We partner with local organizations who are being humble learners and understand their culture and are asking hard and difficult questions about complicated problems. Why do we want to be a humble learner? Because you really want to give bread, not stones. You want to give fish, not snakes. So that's the first thing. Be a humble learner. The second thing is you need to be slowly careful. You need to go slowly. Ephesians 5:15. Be very careful then how you live, not as wise but unwise. Because giving a stone is a much bigger waste of time than giving bread slowly. Sometimes you need to be quick. Sometimes a disaster happens, you're like, we got to act now. But most of the time you need to move slowly and carefully so you can learn along the way. Someone calls you in crisis, usually it's not a crisis that you need to respond to right now. Sometimes you can wait till next Tuesday. You can slow things down where you can get advice. And then sometimes I know in my own work as a pastor, sometimes I have people call me at 11 o'clock and it's a big crisis and everything is on fire. I say, I'll meet you tomorrow afternoon. And then I meet them tomorrow afternoon and everything is calmed down a little bit. You can be slow, careful, so that you don't accidentally give stones when you want to give bread. You try to do that as a board too. You try to not be in a hurry, not do things haphazardly, try to do things right. Carefully, don't make decisions on the fly because we want to give bread, not stones, and fish, not snakes. Be a humble learner. Act slowly. And then this third one, play your part. Do what you can. You can't do everything, but you can do something. You want to be humble, you want to learn, you want to move slowly, but then do something. Do your part. I took a course with the former international director of World Relief from World Vision. World Vision being the world's largest NGO helping poor people. And so he was the head chief international director of all their relief projects. And then he started consulting for the U.S. State Department and for some corporations. And then he's like, ooh, the U.S. State Department has so much money and in a day can move mountains compared to what little old World Vision could do. And there's corporations on earth that have more money than countries. And so then he said, well then, was all my work with World Vision meaningless? Like when the big players are out, is all the work that we do meaningless? And World Vision is way bigger than CRWRF. So is like all of our work meaningless? And he said, no, it's meaningful to the people that you help. It's meaningful to the people that you help. You can't do everything, but you can do your part. You can do something. And then he said, it also matters to God. Yeah. You be a humble learner, you be a humble learner, you work slowly and carefully, but then you act. You do your part. Even if it's a small part and you can't do everything. And that matters to God and to those that you help. In that 2005 locust plague that came down, we decided that we were going to try to do our part, well, also with funding from the Canadian Reform World Relief Fund. And we tried to be humble learners. And so we met with the local Christian missionaries who had worked for 20 years and brought in, local people. They said, what was the problem with all those former distributions? They said, well, the problem was that they didn't take into account our cultural fairness principle. Everybody should get the same amount. No matter who you are, you should always get the same amount. And when that doesn't happen, it causes all kinds of conflict. So we were like, okay, we'll be a humble learner. Let's give everybody the same amount. Seems kind of weird, but we'll abide by that. And then, I was all eager to be like, crisis, move quickly, we got to do something. And they were like, no, slow down. Everybody's moved south to find food. But they're all going to come back up when it's time to plant the next harvest, because they're going to put seed in the ground. But when they come back up, they're not going to have any food to eat. But if they know that we will feed them so that while they work to harvest their new crop, then they'll come back and we can get things started again. Humble learning, move slowly, working with good partners on the ground. So went to the World Food Program. They laid out their big map. This is what people are doing, this over here, this over here. Indeed, this area where the missionary works, nothing's happening. It's like, okay, we're going to feed people in that particular area. That's hard work. Brought out 20 people from the capital city, a bunch of Christians up, brought them up north. We surveyed the whole area, figure out where everybody is. You don't have maps. You got to drive around in four-wheel drives using the missionaries like GPS and trying to find villages, going to villages with, surveying them, figuring out families. What's a family in this area? One village, a family is by this definition. You go to the next village, you have a different definition of family. How are you going to register families? Come back in the evening, go through what we learned. We made some mistakes, go back out again tomorrow, spend 2 weeks surveying all of these people, giving people little green cards so that they can get their food. Difficult. Sometimes you have semi-nomadic people. They moved since last time we knew where they were, and you got to go find them. And then the military shows up because they're used to getting aid food when it comes into town. They like to steal a lot of it. So they show up in their trucks and their machine guns, and we say, okay, well, we'll give you food, but fairness principle. We'll go to your barracks and count how many people you'll have, and we'll give you the same food as everybody else. And then the mayor comes. The mayor also used to appropriating lots of things for himself. You say, no, we'll give you a card, just like we give everybody else. And then the Islamic rebels show up in their four-wheel drives and their big machine guns, walking into our missionary encampment, saying, "No, well, you forgot some of our people, and so you have to give us food." And we're like, "Well, we're not going to give you food, but we'll come with you if you show us where your people are." Drive with them into remote areas and find these nomadic people groups, camped out there, and register them for the food distribution. Humble learning, slowly, carefully, and then you do your part. You can't do everything, but you can do your part. You can't solve the geopolitical problems of West Africa that, produce Islamic rebels in the northern part of the country. You can't solve political corruption and the mayor and the military demanding food, but you can do your part. And in this case, we fed 15,000 people for 3 months while they planted their crops till they could make the next harvest. Humble learning, slowly and carefully, doing your part. Why? So that by God's grace you do your best to give bread and not stones, fish and not snakes. I've given, this is the third time I've given this speech, and these stories still get me emotional. I have lots of really good memories from that food distribution. Some not so good memories, like sleeping on the ground outside because it's hot weather in the missionary encampment, and the wind howling, and lying on my side to block myself from the wind, and having a dried piece of donkey poop blown along at the wind at high speed and hitting the back of my head and disintegrating in my hair and waking me up in the middle of the night. Raise your hand if you've been woken up by donkey poop. No? So many other good memories, though. The missionary lived just like the local people, and it was a Fulani village, and just outside of Fulani village, there was a Bella family. So the Bella are a tribal group in West Africa. They travel just in small family groups. They're nomadic, and they are sort of like, nobody likes them. They're the lowest of the low. And so they come to a village, and then they go to the village. They're not allowed in the village. They have to camp outside, and they go to the mayor, and they say, "Oh, if I pull your water out of your well, will you give me a little bit of food?" That's how they survive. They're basically beggars. And so this Bella woman and her husband with their donkey cart were outside the village at the time of the distribution. And so the missionary lady who was living there, whenever the Bella lady showed up, she would go over there and read scripture with her. And so she had not become a Christian. She was a Muslim, but she had heard the message of Jesus Christ and had a relationship with the missionaries. And so we registered them also to receive food. And the day of the distribution came along, and we had all the food stored at the school, and people are lined up with their cards to get their food. And we noticed that the Bella family is packing up their donkey cart to leave. They haven't gotten anything yet. And so the missionary woman goes over there and says, "Hey, did you get your food yet?" And in the conversation, she realizes that the Bella woman did not believe that she would get food. She thought it was a cruel joke. The missionary woman was like, "No, we have food for you." He took her by the arm, brought her into the village, and she stood beside the mayor's wife and got the same food as everybody. And I watched with my own eyes as they took their food, they sat under the tree, and her husband and her sat down, and for about an hour they just looked at the food, just staring at it in amazement. A little picture of the kingdom of God, where the first shall be last, and the last shall be first, where even the lowest of the low receive bread, along with the good news of Jesus Christ. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. At the end of later on, the missionary told us that after the food distribution and everyone had gone home and everybody in his village had received food, he said that evening he heard a sound he hadn't heard for years. Everybody pounding millet in the evening. So the whole village like dum 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 pounding millet. And he was like, "Isn't that a joyful noise to the Lord?" Isn't that beautiful? At the end, when you feed 15,000 people, you give them food for 3 months. You have to calculate how much food you need. You don't quite know, so you overestimate. We had a bunch of bags left, about 100 bags left of food. So who rolls up? The mayor, the military, the Islamic rebels. Now we get more. Now we want more. We know where it's at the school. The missionary, the Christian Reformed missionary there, he had built a radio station to read gospel messages on and also inform people of events. So he said, "No, it's reserved for other people already." He got on the radio and he called on the radio all of the people, and he said, "If you have anybody who's blind or crippled or disabled living in your home, they can come in 2 days, 3 days' time, and they can receive their own food." And so while the mayor watched, and while the military watched, cripples and the disabled and the people suffering all kinds of ailments came into the school courtyard and got their share of extra food. Because in the kingdom of God, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. People told the missionary in the later months that it was the best distribution they had ever received, that they were happy with this one. And he said he had so many gospel conversations with people as this distribution of food opened doors for him to share the good news of Jesus Christ, the giver of all good gifts. So I tell you that story tonight not to make you think CWRF is the greatest, or to make you think that somehow I was so good in my work in West Africa. But hopefully to work in your heart the worship and praise that God is good, isn't he? That God gives good gifts. He's the giver of all good gifts, and that by God's grace and the power of his Spirit, you and I, we can also learn to give good gifts. That you and I can learn to be humble learners, to go slowly and carefully, and then to do our part, and by His grace we can learn to give bread, not stones. That we can learn how to give fish and not snakes. Thank you very much.